Hello, welcome to Understanding Autism, a Parental Perspective. I'd like to start off by saying thank you for watching. Sorry there's no video, couldn't get it to work, so it's an audio presentation with slides. I'd like to start first with defining autism. The concept of autism was coined in 1911 by German psychiatrist Eugen Bleuler to describe a symptom of most severe cases of schizophrenia, a concept he had also created according to Bleuler. Autistic thinking was characterized by infantile wishes to avoid unsatisfied realities and replace them with fantasies and hallucinations. Autism defined the subject's symbolic inner life and was not readily accessible to observers. Psychologists, psychoanalysts, and psychiatrists in Britain used the word autism with this meaning through the 1920s up until the 1950s. So, the idea of autism was misunderstood and had not been codified into its own psychiatric issue. That would come later with, in the future, the DSM-5, which is the diagnostic material used by psychiatrists and psychologists to define different psychiatric and psychological issues, defines it a disorder on the basis of difficulties in two areas: social communication and restricted repetitive or sensory behaviors or interests. What that means, in a nutshell, is that now that autism has been redefined as autism spectrum disorder, it can carry the weight of complete and total isolation within the individual, from complete absence of social interaction, and also the restrictive repetitive or sensory behaviors or interests has to do with different, I don't know the appropriate way to explain it. My kids, I have 3 boys with autism. My stepson's 27, and then my 2 biological boys are 16 and 14, and they both are on the spectrum. Stephen is extreme, so is Joseph. Joseph also has a secondary diagnosis, genetic disorder called mosaic Down syndrome. The stimming part, the repetitive or sensory behaviors, has to do with things that normal children would not do, neurotypical children. Like, for instance, my eldest son was obsessed with twirling paper, also my youngest. Also, turning a car upside down and watching the wheels spin. Also, it can kind of carry over into obsessive interests. Some people on the spectrum are obsessed with or highly interested in different subjects, mathematics and or music, or a varied array of different things. Just a further reiteration of Dr. Bleuler's 1911 concept of schizophrenia. As you can see in the attached slide, it was misunderstood. It was perceived as schizophrenia, not as its own isolated concept, and it was considered infantile schizophrenia, which means that it appeared before schizophrenia appears in neurotypical children that don't have autism. It usually shows up in late adolescence or teenage years. Now, Dr. Leo Kanner, he was a physician and a child psychiatrist. He started focusing on the bizarre behaviors and difficulty. He started focusing on infancy, in that autism will make its appearance as soon as that child does not hit certain baselines, certain landmarks, if you will. Maybe delayed speech or no speech at all, as both my eldest and my youngest child do not speak. The MRI showed that those specific cortexes within their mind are basically not functioning. They're darkened. There's no current. There's no chemical activity. So I digress. The issue is that for parents, if you notice your child having some peculiar behaviors, for instance, they're very isolated, they do what's called parallel play, or they won't be in the same room with other children, you should probably start thinking about having early intervention services and also some evaluations if the child is obsessed with things that are not toys. So Dr. Kanner fortunately started distinguishing, he called it Kanner syndrome, from schizophrenia, because it didn't have the same carryover, it didn't have the same issues, and it showed up in infancy. So now clinicians in that time period between the 50s and 60s called it Kanner's syndrome. It was also known as dementia infantilis, or childhood schizophrenia and psychosis. It remained the most prevalent label, unfortunately. It wasn't until the 80s, through someone, through a large amount of aggregated medical data. There was an individual, Dr. Remlin, he's now passed away, but he was a major contributor to the movie Rain Man. He ran Autism Research Institute down in San Diego, and he among many others started recodifying the ideologies behind of Kanner's autism. Now, the problem is it exploded in the 90s. It went from like 4 in 10,000 births to 1 in 70. And then there was these cluster groups throughout the country where clustering children with autism, as it was defined back then, started popping up. And it caused a lot of issues. Also, my eldest son, I forgot to mention this, my eldest son was brain damaged at birth. So that also, on top of his autism, he had a pervasive developmental delay and a very slight case of cerebral palsy, which is caused by birth injury. So these are all very emotionally difficult things for parents to deal with, and that's kind of where I wanted to go with this. So this is a statistical analysis from 2014. 1 in 59 children were identified with ASD, or autism spectrum disorder, and it's now listed in the DSM. Interesting, Aspergers was another diagnosis by Dr. Asperger, was eliminated from the DSM in its newest iteration, and it now is covered by ASD, or autism spectrum disorder. Now, here's the really important part: understanding the effect of autism. The social emotional effects for autism: sensory overstimulation, communication difficulties, environmental adaptation struggles, and interpersonal connectivity issues. These are all so interconnected. Within an IEP, which is an individualized education plan, there is a social emotional part for that child. Some children and adults with ASD have a difficult time with internal communication and external communication. They have either no speech, limited speech, or they do a a they do something called parroting or echolalia, where they literally repeat what they hear. Some children have been shown to have high sensitivity to certain bandwidths of light. Some kids have to wear, and adults have to wear, tinted glasses because they can literally see and feel specific frequencies and waveforms from fluorescent lights. So children will stim, they'll flap their hands, they will do a myriad of things that are non-neurotypical. They also have environmentally adaptive struggles where they'll walk in and they can't handle the over excessive noise. They can't handle the light. They cannot deal with it psychologically or even physically. And since they don't have the capacity to communicate, it also exacerbates their abilities to be calm. So because my eldest son and my youngest son could not speak, or cannot speak rather, it causes them to have violent outbursts and become very aggressive and angry, which leads into the next slide. So there's a false presentation in the media, and there's a general misunderstanding within the populace. First and foremost, not all autistic children are savants, which means that they're super intelligent or they have the capacity to do extraordinary things. In daily conversations, I do run into people and explain to them that I have a child with autism, and they believe that my child has some kind of savant-like capabilities, and they do not. Now, my middle child, Daniel, he does draw, and he can read, and he can speak occasionally when he feels like it, but he does have a higher cognitive function than my eldest and youngest child. And it's really, this part is kind of difficult. Autism is confining. You lose friends, you lose family, you have church members that don't understand. It makes you question your faith. It makes you question everything. You lose social connections because your kids can't play with their kids, so people start tapering off in your life. Also, the constant apologetics that parents have to do. I'm sorry my son's being loud. I'm sorry this. Taking my son Daniel on the bus is untenable. It's almost impossible. But there are blessings of autism that are shrouded in the pain. The first time my son told me, "I love you, Daddy," it was hope that maybe he would acquire speech. But it was also something that I'd never heard told to me by my eldest stepson. And it was touching. And there's these little tiny pieces of joy and pain that are intertwined into those moments. And it's very confining. It's very difficult. The media only focuses on the really, happy kids with autism and not the really difficult, I don't want to go into the particulars because it's kind of graphic, but autistic children can be at times extraordinarily difficult and unsanitary. Next slide. This is the important part. Become educated as a parent. Learn everything that you can. We hold in our hands these smart devices that literally give you access to every piece of information you could possibly think of. It's important that you learn. Learn the laws, learn the things that are necessary to assist your child, not only in education, but in their future life. Also, if you have other neurotypical children, teach them, educate them, make them a part of the therapeutic process for the family. You will have to fight for your child in school and in society. So you have to be brave. You have to fight. You have to do and say things at times that are discomforting, and others will feel affronted, but that is your child. That is your progeny. It is what came from your union. Remember that you are always your child's advocate. You are sometimes the only advocate that your child will have in school, in society, in life, even familial issues. There comes a point in a parent's life when you stop wanting to explain things. And it's tenuous, it's difficult, it's taxing, and it's exhausting. So, final words: fight for your kids. Learn to understand the laws, learn to understand the rules. They are protected by federal law, they are protected by state law. They have rights and privileges to free education, to being properly represented in every aspect of life. Some references that I was able to acquire. There's also, Autism Research Institute. I think they're still functioning. Autism Speaks, Autism Now, Raising Autistic Children. There's a lot of organizations. None of them really, I hate to say this, they collect large sums of money, and they really don't do much. Anyways, thank you for listening. Hope you enjoyed, and be at peace.